what kind of a United Nations do we need, do we want? Do we need a United Nations? Well, it's a cliche. You have read it maybe before. It has been said not by me, but by others. If there was no United Nations, we would have to invent one. But the debate will be about what kind of a United Nations do we need. The Financial Times of London said some time ago, the United Nations is vital but flawed. I think that hits it quite well. And we unfortunately talk too much because that upsets us about the flawed part and too little about that part which is good, is performing what we would expect from a United Nations. That's the quiet United Nations. The United Nations that deals with primary education, with health care, with water supply, with food and improved caloric intake, with just about anything that any of us would want, we would need to live a life in peace and progress. And it's, for a moment, I just want to look at that, because a lot has been achieved. I was 32 years in the United Nations. I'm very proud to say that I joined the United Nations as a German 5 years before Germany became a member of the United Nations, because we only became a member in 1973. Because of the two Germanys, there was a hesitation to admit us. I joined in '68. So I think I know the UN and I believe in the UN very deeply. Every single day, in fact, I am happy that I had this experience. So looking back over these 60 plus years that the UN has existed, one can discover a lot of good. Let me superficially just scratch the surface here and tell you that the structure exists. The UN has an immense network of agencies today that deal with just about anything, again, that one needs to handle, to think about in the national and international context. The oldest United Nations agency is the Universal Postal Union in Bern, Switzerland, that is helping to regulate international postal traffic. There is the International Civil Aviation Organization, headquartered in Canada, that is also a UN agency in Montreal. You have the Maritime Organization in London. You have the Agriculture Organization in Rome. You have UNESCO in Paris. You have the World Health Organization in Geneva, the International Labour Organization. So a whole network of agencies that are doing or trying to do with very little resources the right things. And then the third pillar on which this international house stands is international law. And a lot has happened since the United Nations Charter was adopted in 1945. We have since then two covenants that cover civic, political, cultural, social and economic rights. And we have over a dozen of important conventions, some of which involved very strong Canadian leadership also. For example, the Landmine Convention, where Canada took a lead role. So we have the structure, we have the content, and we have the international body of law. And if we lived in an ideal world, then we could say we really have it. We have what it takes to make our life as prosperous for all of us, because that's what the Charter is about, not about some of us, but about all of us, and live in peace and be protected by respective international law. The tragedy is that today the gap between where you and I and we are and where we could be with this kind of situation is huge, is wide, and isn't shrinking, unfortunately. And there are many reasons for that. I want to single out two. One is the sheer dynamics of globalization. I'll talk more about it. And the other one is, unfortunately, the unilateralism of a very important country that decided to leave, temporarily, I hope, I'm sure temporarily, the community of nations. Globalization, the challenge will be we are traveling on a road that is increasingly bifurcating. We can go right, we can go left, and the choice is ours, in a way. Certainly the choice is not a choice that is given, but a choice that is what it is. It's a chosen decision. And we could go the road on which it seems we are beginning to travel. And that is what I call the road of market Darwinism, where everything is about profits, about more quantity, more physical quantity, less up here, but more up here. If you then, I'm glad it's not on this, in a way glad it's not here, but it's a book which is much discussed at the moment in the US and in Europe, John Perkins, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Read it. When you read that book, then you know which road some have chosen. What is new in that book, and which is relevant to the Iraq debate, is that here is an unholy, I call it an unholy alliance between economics, politics, intelligence, and finance. I don't want to say more. You can read it. There's a long description about the Saudi Arabian model and how that model helped to create dependency in Indonesia and Saudi Arabia and Ecuador and Panama, political dependency through debt. You lend, you make a country dependent on you, you have a good income, and you falsify the models so that you have a right to charge high fees because the growth projections are so optimistic and so suggest that you will get out of that with a lot of resources if you decide to enter into a lending program. Well, that is of course turned out not to be so. And Saddam Hussein, whom I absolutely not defend here, he objected to that. And in the book of John Perkins, there's a suggestion that this is one cause why the 1990 dilemma happened. That Saddam Hussein was lured into believing he will be left alone if he attacks Kuwait, and then people in the distance were happy that he did this, because that for them was then, of course, the justification to move in and change the policies. So we have another road. It's not that there's another road which to me is immensely more rewarding and in line with what the purpose of the United Nations is. And there's a man for whom I respect a lot. His name is Johan Galtung. He is a conflict researcher for many years, an old man today from Norway, who has all his life tried to argue, make the case for resolving conflicts peacefully. And his definition of globalization is the following: a system in which men and women, the three generations which inhabit Earth at the same time, all races, all classes, live together in dignity. I think that is a magnificent definition of that ideal that I guess the Charter and we all want to pursue. So here we have the issue of choices, in which direction we want to take globalization. I've never quite understood why one can be anti-globalization, because globalization takes place whether we like it or not. We must give it direction, I think.